Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to this webinar. We are delighted that you are all here. We're just going to take a couple of minutes, let some more folks drop in for the session. Some people are just sort of reestablishing what Zoom is for them. So we'll just take a couple of minutes and we will get started at 2 or 3 minutes past the hour. So if you need an extra cup of coffee, now is your moment to run and grab. And we will get this thing started shortly. For those folks who have just dropped into the call, thank you for joining us. We will get started in about 1 to 2 more minutes, just allowing some extra participants to jump onto the session with us. So hold fire, grab a cup of coffee, and we will be getting rolling in about 1, maybe 2 more minutes. I tell you, Austin, it's a fashionable webinar. It is drawing all the best people.
Hey, it's a good day. It's a good day where we're at right now. It's going to be 89 degrees. It's sunny out. It's going to be positive.
I remember, I used to live in New York. I remember those days.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It looks like we are out of the cold, so that is always.
Are you in that 2-week window where it's perfect before the humidity gets there? Is that where you are right now?
We're approaching that 2-week window. We're getting there. Right now, the nights are nice and cool and there's not very many bugs, so that's awesome. You're not getting eaten alive by mosquitoes. So
Oh,
we're in a good spot.
yep. All right. Thank you, everyone, for being patient with us. Let's get this thing rolling. And so welcome to this webinar where we're going to talk about the Secure Act 2.0, but more specifically, what the New York State Secure Choice Savings Program looks like, otherwise known as the New York State Sponsored Program. All right. If you're wondering who this person is with the strange accent, my name is Marc Fowler. I am the Director of Retirement Education here at Human Interest. And I am a former New Yorker, but before that I was from England. And so that explains the slightly off-center accent. And my passion is all about how do we support small businesses. Having done so, like actually ran 2 of my own businesses in New York some time ago. But I love to surround myself with people much smarter than me. And so we've also got Austin, who's fought through fire and thunder to be with us for the kickoff of this. Austin, who are you? What do you do? Why are you here?
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Mark. My name is Austin Spite. Born and raised in Rochester, New York. I've been with Human Interest for over 3 years now. And before that, I was actually with Paychex. I started off on the dark side there and spent 8 years working in 401k and group benefits as a whole. So rounding out almost 12 years of being in benefits, and kind of similar story, Mark. The small business environment is one that needs a lot of support, and that's why I'm here to help the small businesses out there and keep everyone compliant, keep everyone going, and overall just make things better.
Absolutely. And you're local to the New York State area, and that is your specialty, right? New York State in particular.
You bet, man. You bet.
And
All
so,
things upstate New York.
yeah, at the end of this session, we will be sharing Austin's contact details. So if you have anything specific to ask, please drop in, check in with Austin. He's only too happy to run down the information for you. All right. That said, what are we going to talk about today? Well, we are going to kick it off with a very light touch on who is Human Interest, if you've never heard of us before. We're then going to take a moment to look at the broad picture across the US in regards to retirement. Then we'll look at how the states are responding to that picture, and in particular, pull out the magnifying glass and look at New York State. After which we'll touch on the federal legislation known as Secure Act 2.0 and how that is setting things up for small businesses. And then we'll also talk about the partnership between Complete Payroll and Human Interest. After which we will throw the doors open and say, hey, bring up your questions. We're only too delighted to sort of look at those and answer those. In fact, as we go through the session, if you have any questions, comments, or even words of support, feel free to drop those into the Q&A box, right? Into the Q&A box. And even if it's not the Q&A section, I will see if we can answer the questions during the flow of the webinar. If not, we'll get to the end and we'll make sure we cover them then if possible. All right. All of that said, let's kick this off with a very light touch on who is Human Interest. And if you haven't heard of us, we are essentially a 401k and 403b provider. 403b is essentially 401ks for not-for-profit organizations. And really, that's what we do. And what we don't do is provide legal, tax, or accounting advice. So if you need anything specific on that, please make sure you connect with the corresponding professionals. And everything we talk about today is purely for informational purposes. All right, that should keep my legal team happy. In essence, what we really do is we work to make sure that everyone in all lines of work have access to retirement benefits, meaning our driving force is helping everybody retire with dignity. And that is because of the broad picture that exists in the US when it comes to retirement. If you were to ask me, what's one word that sums up the current situation across the US? That word could be bleak, because what we see is there is this gap that exists between what Americans have in retirement savings and what they will need in retirement savings. There's an organization out there called the World Economic Forum, and their charter is to assess the relative health of economies around the world. When they look at the US, they see a challenge around that retirement, and they predict that gap between what we have and what we're going to need in retirement savings by the time we hit 2050 is going to be around $137 trillion. Right? That's so much money. I can't even picture how many zeros that is. So Google tells me that's enough money to fund the US budget, including funding the military, for the next 22 and a half years. Right? That's the shortfall projected in retirement savings. Now, when we look at those numbers a little bit more in detail, what we start to see is that over 3/4 of Americans are projected to, or actually say they are behind where they would like to be in terms of having what they need for retirement savings. And if you're kind of wondering, well, how do you measure that? One estimate is for every $1,000 of retirement expense per month, you should have $120,000 in your retirement account. Meaning, if you projected to have $8,000 a month in retirement expenses, you would need $960,000, basically $1 million in retirement accounts to be able to fund that. And arguably, the even more worrying statistic is this one right at the top, that around 1 in 4 US adults are likely to hit retirement with zero in the bank account. And obviously that then provides challenges for the state and federal economies about folks staying in the workforce longer or having to rely on Social Security, which we all have some hesitation about. Okay. Now, you might think, well, is this because people don't value retirement savings? And the answers seem to be no on that, because 62%, almost two-thirds of workers say, actually, I'd switch jobs for a similar uh, payroll, wage salary. That's the word I was desperately grasping for. If they offered a better or a retirement plan, right? In fact, 85% of workers value a 401k as an important benefit or a similar retirement benefit. And my question to that number is, what are the other 15% thinking? Right? They must be independently wealthy or have side hustles or something. And then 4 out of 5 workers say retirement benefits are a major factor in considering a new role. If you've been looking for a role recently, you've probably scrolled all the way down to the bottom to see the benefits package and kept an eye out for the retirement benefit that's down there. And we're even seeing that magnified with the new generation entering the workforce. Gen Z, the 18 to 24-year-olds in the workforce now, place a special significance on retirement benefits as well. So if all of that is the case, well, then how come more people are not saving for retirement? And the simple word for that is access, right? And what access is does your company offer benefits for you to connect with, right? So large scale companies, it's almost default that if you went to work for a Fortune 500, you would be shocked if they didn't have a full suite of retirement benefits. As we start coming down the size scale of employer, we notice the access to those benefits gets reduced dramatically. All the way down to the point where if a company size is less than 50 full-time employees, less than half the time they are even offering benefits, let alone whether people choose to access them or not. Less than half the time they even have access. And stats show that employer connected retirement accounts basically make Americans 15 times more likely to save for retirement. And that goes up to 20 times if it's automatically connected to their payroll. All right. And so that, in a nutshell, leaves us with the situation that there are 57 million Americans who don't even have access to an employer-provided retirement benefit, right? And that is why things have to change. That is where that gap is really coming from. And so what is happening to address that? Because people see it and people are taking action. Well, the first sort of movement happens on a state level. And what we see here is the birth of what's known as the state mandate. This is where states across the country say, you know what, we're going to put a law in place that says you either have to connect your employees to a state-run retirement plan, or rather, more accurately, a state-sponsored retirement plan, or a third-party provided retirement benefit. But the one thing you cannot continue to do is offer your employees no connection to benefits at all. And so what we then see across the country is states ramping up their efforts to make sure employees have connections to retirement benefits. And what we see is of the states, 48 have started pushing the sort of go button on this. And then of that, 19 states and 2 cities have already passed legislation. 10 states have active programs up and running. And those 10 states may well have penalties subject to non-compliance of that state mandate. Now, the thing that a lot of people think is, well, I'm headquartered in a state that doesn't have an active mandate right now, so I'm good, right? The answer to that is maybe, maybe not. Because what we see is it's not about where your company is headquartered, it is about where your employees pay their taxes. So you might be seeing a company that's based out of South Dakota, which has no efforts for state mandate right now. But if they had 5 employees in California, or 5 in the state of Illinois, or even 1 in Oregon, they would trigger that state's state mandate. All right. And that is why we provide that QR code there, which takes you to a resource that states where each of those states are as of the last legislative movement in that state. All right. If you want to figure out specifically, feel free, and I'll share his contact details at the very end. He apologizes. He had to drop off. But Austin will be able to help you sort of work out what your specific situation is. All right. All right. So now let's jump into what is New York State's situation. Now, first thing to talk about here is this is still a plan that is in the finalization stage. All right. So what you won't see here are any specific deadlines. Now, the last board meeting that happened for this program, they have chosen all the necessary pieces of the infrastructure. They are just in contract negotiations. And then we will see the deadlines coming in to support this program of when this has to be enacted. It's likely to be relatively soon, but again, we're still in the finalization stage of this. And when it is enacted, this is likely to be the program details. And so what it will be is an automatic enrollment Roth IRA program, which we'll talk about in more detail shortly. But any employer in New York State who has 10 or more employees is required to offer a qualified retirement plan. Okay. Determining who qualifies as an eligible employee is anyone over the age of 18 who obviously has a social security number, because that's how they'll be tracking the employee side of things, and is paying taxes in the state of New York. Employees will be automatically enrolled, which is a standard we're seeing across all of these, almost all of these state mandates, and will come in at a default contribution rate of 3% of their gross pay. Now, of course, they will have all the options and all the ability to jump in and change that. But if they don't change it, it will start taking 3% of their gross pay. Now, why this is so important for business owners to know about is because New York State is highlighting the fact that it might have some of the most severe penalties for non-compliance of any of the state's mandates we've seen rolled out so far. And what it says is, for the first violation of non-compliance, it'll levy a fee of $250 per employee. If you stay in non-compliance, that'll jump to an additional $500 per employee. And if you stay even then in non-compliance, they will levy an additional $1,000. So as you can see, that totals up very, very quickly. I saw a little message in the Q&A. Will these slides and videos be available afterwards? Yes, we will make sure that that is all part of the follow-up package after the webinar. All right. So that's the sort of program in a nutshell. One of the questions that comes up is, how much does this program cost employers to participate in? And the answer to that is generally nothing. Although, if it's not financially costing, there is a cost on the administrative side, meaning that you will have to do some legwork. All right. And so, what we mean by that is if you connect to the New York State Secure Choice Program, that every time somebody comes in and alters their contribution amount, you will have to communicate that employee's choice to the state program every time that happens. Every time somebody raises their hand and says, hey, I don't want to be a part of this, again, needs to be reflected accurately and without any delay. And then you'll obviously have to file the contributions and debit the company's bank account every pay period, and do so within 7 days of payroll. And then obviously, anytime somebody joins the company or leaves the company, that will have to be reflected as well. All right. And all of that is done pretty manually. And so any error in that can create a non-compliant situation. So that's where you'll have to sort of work with the support program for New York State to make sure that any errors are fixed in a timely manner as well. So so that's the sort of administrative component, the burden, let's say, that will fall if you choose to go through that program, right? But it is, however, free financially. So what does, earlier on I said, hey, you can either connect to this program or through a third party qualified benefit. How do those things stack up? Now, there are so many options out there that what we're going to do is just put the New York State program in a side-by-side with a 401k, and we'll talk about our 401k just for a point of reference. Okay. And so the key thing here is that the state program for New York is free for employers to join. All right. It is an IRA program, an individual retirement account program, and the IRS sets the limits on those, that the contributions are, if you are under the age of 50 years old, the maximum you can put in is $7,000. All right. If you're over the age of 50, you can add an additional 1,000 there to a maximum of 8,000. Because it is essentially a state program, it doesn't have the capability to allow customization of that plan, either in the way the plan is set up or in the fund lineup that is available to employees. Because it is an IRA platform, IRA platforms are not allowed under IRS regulations to offer a match or profit sharing option, right? So the company cannot contribute in on behalf of its participants. Now, there is no cost for the plan to be administered, but there is an asset fee. And so anyone saving in that plan, right, who is a participant, will have a percentage of their savings assessed as the asset fee. And the plan, as we talked about, is predominantly manual because there are only very limited options for integrating that plan with your payroll system. All right. Now, if we come across to talk about a 401k or 403b, these are obviously much more fully featured qualified plans, allowing for contribution limits up to $23,000 for this year if you're under the age of 50. If you're over the age of 50, you get an additional 7.5, which means the employee contribution can max out at $30,500. All right. Because this is an employer-sponsored plan, it allows full customization of how that plan is set up, along with some movement in how the fund lineup is reflected. We will also see on a 401k platform that you can, if you choose to, enable match and profit sharing, right? They don't have to be enabled, but they can be. And that can be a very tax-friendly way of adding more contributions in on behalf of your employees from the employer. One of the great things here, and this kind of combines with the final point, but the fully bundled solution is that everything happens in-house here. All the technology is within our boundaries. So really, it helps with streamlining the administration. And because this is a third-party provider that essentially you hasn't cost outlay, there are Secure Act tax credits, which we'll talk about shortly. But the number one reason why this can be attractive for businesses is this payroll integration. Now, what Human Interest does with Complete Payroll, we'll talk about the partnership shortly, but essentially the partnership allows us to remove all of that administrative burden, removing so many of the avenues for human error, and also allows you to have, if you were to instigate this kind of plan, allows you, particularly if you're operating in multiple states, to meet the criteria of any state mandates around the country. All right, so we've talked about New York State. We've talked about the sort of state-sponsored plans as a general across the US, but there's another layer on top of this, and that is the federal response to the retirement crisis, which is known as Secure Act 2.0. Now, this was a package of legislation that was passed in December 29th, 2022, and is a monster. And there's no reason why you should want to know about all 92 provisions unless you're into that kind of thing. But I'm going to hit you with the highlights so that you can amaze your friends at a dinner party coming up. And really what it means is it encourages employees to participate in a number of different ways. And not only that, encourages them to participate earlier, right? Because we all know the long-term effects of compound interest. It essentially doubles what was an existing tax credit for new plans, essentially for anyone under the sort of employee threshold of 50, but it is still there to a lesser extent for employee numbers 51 through to 100, and we'll show that shortly. Adds a brand new tax credit for employer contributions, so that match and profit sharing. Actually, for the profit sharing, there is a employer contribution for tax credit there. Plus, it is requiring auto enroll and auto escalation on any new plans, but you only need to have them added for plan year 2025. All right. So the tax credits is really what sort of opens a lot of people's eyes, because this is really about creating a favorable situation for small businesses to start offering retirement plans. If we go all the way back to that chart at the beginning where we talked about access, where was the biggest issue? Small employer companies, right? So the tax incentives are aimed directly at that portion of the American workforce. And so what we see is, as I said, a very favorable situation to start offering, 401ks and other retirement benefits in 2024. And so what we see is that any new plan started after that enactment date of December 29th, 2022, will be eligible for these tax incentives to a different degree, depending on how the employer is set up. So first, that doubling of the existing tax credit for starting a new plan. So businesses with up to 50 employees may be eligible for a tax credit of up to 100% of plan startup costs, right? Capping out at $5,000 per employer per year for the first 3 years. So there is potentially $15,000 in tax credits available. The employer contribution tax credit means that small businesses with up to 50 employees will receive a new tax credit based on a percentage of employer contributions up to $1,000 per employee for any employee making less than $100,000. All right. And so all of that, plus the fact that if you engage auto enroll, which is going to be required next year anyway, or next plan year anyway, you will also get an additional $500 for the first 3 years. So what you can see there on the chart on the right-hand side is that in year one, even if we took away the employer contributions, because that's an optional part of it, you could access $5,500 in tax credits, going all the way up to $16,500 in year three. But you might be able to put on top of that, if you do engage in a match or profit sharing, additional amounts on top of that as well. All right. Plus the fact that any contribution you make could be tax deductible up to a certain threshold. All right. So there's a number of advantages in a tax situation now created because of Secure Act 2.0. All right. So we've talked about the sort of requirement from New York about connecting in your employees to a retirement benefit. We've talked about the sort of tax incentives of doing so, which means it is essentially very, very affordable right now to start up a retirement plan. But that still leaves one of the traditional blockers in place. And that traditional blocker is, I can't handle the administration of a retirement benefit because I'm just a small employer, right? I don't have the staff and the experience to be able to administrate this well enough. And that is where complete payroll and human interest can really change the game for you. Now, I won't necessarily bore you with the details of this because now we're going to get into integration types and APIs, SFTPs, and all that kind of stuff. If you want that conversation, I'll connect you with Austin afterwards, and you can feel free. He will talk you through it time and time again. But essentially what happens is the complete payroll system can communicate directly with the 401k platform here at Human Interest, and Human Interest can communicate directly back to the payroll provider at Complete. All right. And so what that means is all of that communication is happening electronically and essentially in real time. So when you add somebody to your payroll or somebody steps out of your organization, that is reflected almost immediately in the 401k, right? Anytime somebody goes into the 401k and tweaks their contribution limits, etc., that is communicated directly into the payroll provider and reflected, obviously, therefore, in their pay stubs very, very quickly. So that really helps streamline all of the administrative processes, but also allows us to make sure that the whole plan stays in ultimate compliance all the way through. And if you know about the fun of filing a Form 5500, we can potentially do that on your behalf, just straight out of the plan. So there is a number of advantages that comes from our partnership with Complete Payroll, the fact that the two things talk together, right? That said, we've talked about the New York State mandate, and we've talked about retirement plans in general and the 401k here at Human Interest. If you're thinking about what plan might work for you, here are some questions you might think about asking. All right. The first is, what retirement plans will keep my business in compliance? Because whatever you do, whatever you choose, you do not want to fall foul of those penalties for non-compliance. So make sure that what you look for is a qualified retirement benefit. So the New York State plan is a qualified benefit. A 401k is a qualified benefit. Then, how do the annual contribution limits differ for each plan? All right. And the reason you might want to think about that is potentially owners, highly compensated employees may be looking to put a lot away. And if they don't have that, then that benefit becomes of limited value for them. So thinking about how the annual contribution limits differ. Think also, will there be employer and or employee fees for my chosen plan? So really what you want to do there is break out the costs for the employer. How do those compare? Like, break out the costs for the employees and how do those compare? Oftentimes we see that folks stop at just looking at the employer cost. Also take a moment to look at your employee fees as well. Think about, can I integrate my plan with the existing payroll provider? Because that feeds directly into question number 5, which is, how much administrative work am I willing to take on? All right. We talked about the fact that there will be administrative tasks for you to complete if you jump onto the New York State program, but you balance that with the fact that it is a free program, right? However, an integrated 401k takes all of that administrative work off and allows you to essentially do what you do best of running your business. And then on top of this, these are all wonderful questions to ask if you're looking at starting a new plan, right? If you have a plan in place already, then you have something else to think about, which is, how is my plan performing? Because that is part of what we call your fiduciary responsibility. And so if you're offering a plan to your employees, you want to think about, is this working in their best interests for saving for retirement? In which case, you may want to do what's known as a benchmark test, where essentially you strip down the plan you have plus others in the market and compare them apples to apples. This should be done periodically. Advice is anywhere from once every 1 to 3 years, something like that. Because if you don't, there are essentially opportunities for your employees to levy charges against the fact that the plan was not run in their best interests. So benchmarking is something, if you have a plan, that is worth considering. We do this at Human Interest for free. So if you want to engage in that, hit Austin up once I give you his contact details and we can talk about what that is. And the worst case scenario in there is that you just essentially sort of execute your fiduciary duty and you have to have a conversation with Austin. But you get this breakdown of the benchmarking fees. So all of that takes us to this place where we've covered a lot of ground. And I think it's time to see what areas you want to get into a bit more detail about. So we'll open it up to questions, and we've got a few in the locker already. So one question that came in is, Does the New York State mandate talk to all employees or full-time employees? Well, that's a great question. And the first part of it is obviously all full-time employees will likely qualify if they are above the age of 18, social security number, etc., will probably qualify as an eligible employee. And there may well be a lot of your part-time employees that qualify too. Now, they're still finalizing details, but the Secure Act 2.0 also brings in increased participation availability for part-time employees, and that's likely to be reflected in the New York State mandate as well. And so all employees, maybe not, the interns, etc., might not be covered under this, but it's likely that your significant part-time employees and obviously all your full-time employees will be covered. Does this requirement apply to both profit and not-for-profit organizations? My understanding is yes. I would probably connect with Austin just to confirm that. Last time I looked at the specific details, it was a little fuzzy on that. It didn't rule it out, but I believe it is both profit and non-for-profit. All right. Oh, here's a good one. If we currently have a 401k plan that has been established since 2015, do we still have to comply with Secure Act 2.0 auto-enroll and or the New York Secure Choice Savings? Can they be enrolled in both? So the first part is if you have an existing plan pre that 2022 date, you will not be required to add auto-enroll at this point, right? You can leave it in as optional for all your employees to sign up as and when they wish. With the New York Secure program, all you have to do is log in there once it's live and submit proof that you have that plan in place and you are exempted from the New York State mandate. Can they be enrolled in both? I don't actually specifically know the answer to that, so that's one I'll have Austin follow up for. So Matt, who's running webinar support for us right now, could you just take a note of that, and I'll have Austin sort of chase that down for you?
Yep, got it written down.
What about not-for-profits under 10 employees? Well, the 10 employees, if you've got 9, 8, 7, etc., whether you're profit or not-for-profit, the New York State mandate does not apply to you at this point, right? Now, what we have seen across states across the rest of the country is it starts at a certain threshold, then over time, that threshold starts to drop lower, right? So I'll give you, for instance, California, I think, started at 15, dropped to 5 employees, and in 2025, the end of 2025, will drop to any employee in the state of California. All right. And so that might be something that New York State will follow. We don't know yet until they sort of start that first phase of putting deadlines in for 10. Is there a minimum number of employees required for participation? So if you want to join, you can join. If you want to join the New York State program, you can join with any number of participants. All right. But if you have 10 or more, you will be required to offer a benefit. All right. If for a human interest 401k, again, we work with businesses. We are designed to work with businesses of every size. And so if you have one employee all the way up to several thousand, we will work with you. Right. We have a plan type that'll work very, very well. And the last one says, my question was just answered. Thank you. Well, you're very, very welcome. And so again, just to touch on the state mandate thing, because so many of us now have sort of remote workforces scattered across the country. Please just make sure that you don't just focus on New York State. If we went back to that chart, you would see that Maine, Connecticut, and a few other states in the Northeast are all up and running. Everything on the West Coast is up and running, Illinois as well. And so if you have employees scattered across the country, make sure you're aware of, do you also trigger those state mandates as well? All right. With all of that, if you have any other, I've got another question just dropping in. If an employee joins and then leaves the business, does their plan go with them? So that is one of the sort of nuanced points between the state program and the sort of 401k platform, right? The state program is an individual retirement account. So when they leave, that account has high portability. So they can take it and move to another company and keep running with that account, right? So in the sense, there's not much of a employee retention benefit for the organization there because it is highly, highly portable. Now, with the benefits package that comes within a 401k, that can have a number of tweaks in it that help with the retention element into the employer. All right. So the New York State IRA is designed to be an individual retirement account. And again, that is highly portable. All right. Here is Austin's details, and this will be with the deck that we send out and in the recording. Any follow-up questions, please talk with Austin or with your team at Complete Payroll, who are only too happy to support and make sure that you're getting everything you need to set up what's right for your business. All right. With all of that, just some of the, if you want to do any of the research on anything we've talked about today, here are the sort of further resources you might want to check into. But with all of that said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been an absolute pleasure and a privilege sitting with all of you. And obviously, thank you to Complete Payroll. We really do appreciate our partnership with you guys and look forward to hearing about all kinds of success for your company, your clients, as we move forwards. So thank you so much, everybody. Oh, you're very welcome, folks. Those who are saying thank you in the chat, my absolute pleasure.